Scorpio doesn't lose people the way others do. They don't plead, they don't chase, they don't unravel in public. When something ends, Scorpio doesn't fall apart. They retreat, they contain, they survive. Quietly, completely, and for a long time, that feels like strength. But the most dangerous mistake Scorpio makes is not loving the wrong person or trusting the wrong one. It's not betrayal, abandonment, or heartbreak. Scorpio already knows how to endure pain. You've built an entire identity around enduring it. The real mistake is much harder to notice because it feels like wisdom while it's happening. Scorpio learns very early how to close doors without slamming them, how to reduce emotional access without cutting the connection, how to remain present while quietly pulling the core of themselves out of reach. From the outside, this looks like composure. From the inside, it feels like safety. But there's a question Scorpio almost never asks themselves, because asking it would destabilize everything they built to survive. What happens when nothing can hurt you? Because nothing can reach you either? Scorpio does not experience the world lightly. You feel everything with intensity, but you reveal very little of it. Somewhere early in life, often before you had the language to explain it, you learned that closeness comes with consequences. That emotional exposure can be used, that once someone sees your softer parts, they may not handle them with care. So you adapt it. You became observant. You learned to read people faster than they could read themselves. You learned to notice inconsistencies, shifts in tone, subtle changes in behavior. You learned how to stay one step ahead emotionally, not to dominate, but to protect. This vigilance becomes second nature. It feels intelligent. It feels controlled. It feels necessary. And the world rewards this version of you. People admire your depth. They respect your boundaries. They are drawn to your intensity, your mystery, your emotional gravity. You become someone others are careful with, someone they don't underestimate, someone who seems unshakable. But armor, no matter how well crafted, is still armor. And armor is not meant to be worn forever. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, protection turns into habit. Control turns into identity. You stop distinguishing between what is genuinely unsafe and what simply requires vulnerability. You stop asking whether someone could be trusted and start assuming they shouldn't be. This is where the first emotional fracture begins. Scorpio starts to believe that staying guarded is the same as staying safe. That if you never fully open, you'll never be fully wounded. That if you keep emotional leverage, you'll never be powerless. So you ration access, you reveal yourself in layers, tests, thresholds that most people don't even realize they're being measured against. You call this discernment, and it is at first, but over time, discernment hardens into exclusion. You don't just protect yourself from harm, you protect yourself from intimacy. You don't just keep out danger, you keep out closeness. And because this process is quiet, controlled, and logical, it doesn't feel like self-sabotage. It feels like maturity. This is where the second emotional layer tightens. Scorpio becomes someone who is respected more than they are held, desired but not deeply known, trusted with secrets, but rarely given permission to be vulnerable in return. People feel your intensity, but they don't step into it. They orbit it. They sense there is more beneath the surface, but they also sense they're not meant to touch it. And for a while, that's fine. You tell yourself you don't need reassurance, that you're self-sufficient, that needing someone is a liability. Independence becomes a point of pride. Emotional containment becomes proof of strength. Silence becomes familiar. But something subtle begins to happen. Scorpio carries everything internally. Fear, grief, longing, desire, all processed alone, behind closed doors. You don't ask for help because you learn not to expect it. You don't lean because leaning once cost you something. You don't reveal need because need feels like surrender, and surrender feels dangerous. And people respond to this version of you. They learn that you don't ask, that you don't complain, that you don't break down. Over time, effort becomes uneven, not because others don't care, but because Scorpio never signals that closeness is truly welcome. You become the strong one, the composed one, the one who can handle it. Distance becomes normalized. Mystery becomes your role. And Scorpio, without ever consciously choosing it, becomes someone who is admired from afar instead of met up close. The regret doesn't arrive during chaos. Scorpio is too controlled for dramatic implosions. It arrives during a quiet moment late at night, or during a rare pause when there is no threat to manage, no conflict to navigate, no emotional fire to put out. That's when the realization lands. There are people around you, but no one inside. There is loyalty, but no surrender. There is connection, but not safety. You don't feel betrayed, you feel untouched. This is the moment Scorpio finally sees the pattern they were too busy surviving to notice. How often you withheld instead of revealing. How often you tested instead of trusting. How often you waited for others to prove themselves without ever showing what was actually at stake. You start to recognize how many relationships stayed on the surface, not because others were shallow, but because you never fully entered them. How many chances at real intimacy dissolved, not through conflict, but through quiet emotional distance. And the most painful realization settles in, slowly but unmistakably. You were not protecting your heart to heal. You were protecting it to avoid losing control. That is the regret. Not the boundaries themselves, but the life lived behind them. Scorpio believed that control would keep them safe, that power would prevent abandonment, that emotional dominance would prevent vulnerability from being used against them. And for a long time, it worked. You survived. You endured. You stayed intact. But survival is not the same as living. Love does not enter spaces built entirely for defense. Intimacy cannot grow where vulnerability is treated as a threat. Being strong enough to endure pain is not the same as being open enough to receive care. This is where the third emotional layer opens, and it is the most frightening one. There comes a moment when Scorpio stops asking who can be trusted and starts asking what it has cost them to trust no one fully. This question destabilizes everything because it threatens the identity Scorpio built to survive. If I lower my guard, will I disappear? If I reveal my fear, will it be used against me? If I allow myself to need, will I lose power? This fear is not imaginary. It comes from real wounds, real betrayals, real moments where vulnerability had consequences. But it keeps Scorpio locked in a life that is powerful, yet emotionally distant, safe, yet lonely, controlled, yet quietly unfulfilled. And yet, this is also where healing begins. Because Scorpio slowly learns a truth that contradicts everything survival taught them. Not every vulnerability leads to destruction. Not every surrender is a loss of power. And not every person who enters your inner world is there to take something from you. Some connections only exist when you risk being seen without armor. Scorpio does not need to become softer for others. Scorpio needs to become braver with themselves. Brave enough to name desire without control. Brave enough to admit fear without strategy. Brave enough to allow closeness without guarantees. The truth is this: the real mistake was never loving too deeply. The real mistake was believing that control was the only way to stay alive. Scorpio will regret many things in life, but the deepest regret will always be this: they spent so long guarding their heart that they forgot to let it be held. And the moment Scorpio allows themselves to be seen without calculation, to be close without dominance, to be vulnerable without self-betrayal, is the moment their real transformation finally begins.